Hi everyone. Today we're diving into a chilling story that will leave you in shock. This is a tale of a brutal crime that took place on August 2nd, 2016 at Spring Creek Park, sparking widespread outrage. How many more incidents like this have to occur before the authorities take action? Local residents had been warning authorities about suspicious individuals loitering in the park. Some would gather in groups while others wandered alone. Their presence made the locals uneasy, but unfortunately, it took a tragic event to finally draw attention to this issue. The incident also sparked a wider conversation about the safety of women runners, especially those who jog alone. A survey showed that 54% of women express anxiety when out for a run, fearing verbal harassment or physical assault. Karina Vetrano's story is both shocking and perplexing. What makes it so terrifying is that the attack happened in broad daylight, in a relatively busy area, and her death had a hauntingly eerie element. The investigation and subsequent sentencing raised more questions than answers. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, Karina had plans to meet her father after work. They were eager to catch up, as family gatherings had become rare with everyone's busy schedules. Karina was juggling 2 jobs, and she cherished any opportunity to spend time with her father. Philip picked her up and took her to his home, where they shared their experiences of the past week. When it was time for Karina to head home, she asked her father if he'd like to join her for a jog, something they used to do often. However, Philip declined, explaining that his back hurt, making it difficult to run. He jokingly suggested calling a cab for her, but Karina turned it down. The weather was beautiful and she was training for an upcoming marathon. Recently having broken up with her boyfriend, Karina thought a run would clear her mind. It would be the last time her family saw her. At 5:45 p.m., Karina left the house for her jog. Her first destination was Spring Creek Park, a serene and tranquil spot surrounded by greenery. It was a hidden gem amidst the concrete jungle. However, only a portion of the park was open to the public, while the rest was filled with thick vegetation and swampy areas. Mr. Vetrano had urged his daughter to stick to her usual route and avoid wandering into unfamiliar areas. Sadly, Karina ignored his advice. In search of solitude, she ventured into a secluded, grassy area. Karina's peace was shattered when she felt a sharp blow to the back of her head, causing her to collapse. This poor decision would cost her life. Meanwhile, uncertainty consumed the Vetrano household. 2 hours had passed since their farewell, and Karina hadn't returned or answered their calls. She had promised to keep her phone on her, which only heightened their worry. Her father sensed something was terribly wrong, and he decided to ask his neighbor, who happened to be a high-ranking officer in the New York City Police Department, for help. This was not something Philip would have done lightly. As a result, Karina Vetrano was reported missing. The police immediately began combing the area, bringing in experienced search dogs, as the first 24 hours are critical in missing person cases. While the police worked tirelessly, Philip, joined by volunteers, also began searching on his own. He scoured the park, making phone calls and combing through the tall grass. As dusk approached, he noticed a faint light shining from the grass. Hopeful, he thought that Karina had simply lost her phone. He carefully made his way through the underbrush and soon stumbled upon something soft, her lifeless body. In disbelief, he turned her over and recognized her face. A scream of anguish escaped his lips. It was Karina. She hadn't just lost her phone. She had lost her life. He thought his daughter was simply ignoring her phone, but the truth was far darker. She had been robbed of her life. The harsh reality of what had happened hit Mr. Vetrano like a ton of bricks. As he screamed, the police rushed to the scene, pulling him away from his daughter's lifeless body. They tried to explain to him that this was now a crime scene, and anything in the area could be considered evidence. Law enforcement urged him not to touch anything, making it clear that tampering with the scene was not allowed. On the way home, Mr. Vetrano's mind raced with thoughts of how he would tell his wife about their daughter's tragic death. Memories of their life together flashed before his eyes. He remembered the day Karina was born on July 12, 1986, in Queens. From the moment she was born, he had been proud of her. She was obedient and well-behaved, and he had vivid memories of taking her to her first day of school. She excelled in her studies, earning a master's degree in speech pathology from St. John's University. Karina had always dreamed of helping children, particularly those with autism. She was a woman of many talents, an avid traveler, a passionate writer, and a lover of sports, especially running. Their shared love for running had brought them even closer. He remembered how protective he was of her when it came to boyfriends, always wanting her to find someone who truly loved her. He hoped that she would one day build a strong family, just like he and Kathy had, and give him the joy of grandchildren. The journey home felt endless, and as they approached the house, Mr. Vetrano paused, taking a deep breath. He knew he had to be strong for his family. He had to hold himself together. As he stepped inside, Kathy was already at the door, her face filled with understanding. She hugged him tightly, not needing any words to know what had happened. Soon, family and friends of Karina were informed, but accepting the shock of her sudden death was hard enough, let alone the violent nature in which she had been taken. Investigators concluded that she had fought for her life with every ounce of strength. It was clear she had resisted. Her hands were still clenched, and bruises and abrasions marked her body. Her athletic clothing was torn, evidence of her struggle. The autopsy revealed that the back of her skull had been struck with a blunt object, likely a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A visible mark was found on her neck. Further examination by forensic experts uncovered the intimate nature of the crime. Earth and grass were found under Karina's fingernails, likely from her attempts to escape her attacker's grip. Her teeth were cracked and knocked out in places, suggesting that she had fought back by biting. Her neck showed multiple scratches, evidence of her desperate attempt to break free from her attacker's hold. Karina fought fiercely for her life. Unwilling to go down without a struggle, Karina Vetrano was not just an athlete, she had a range of interests. In 2013, she starred in a short film by her friend, screenwriter Petro Georgiadis, based on a poem she had written titled Paradox. On her blogs, she often explored deep topics including love and death. Tragically, just after the incident, disturbing new details surfaced in the media. In Princeton, Massachusetts, the body of another woman, also out for a run in a secluded area, was found under similar circumstances. The similarities between the cases were eerie, and it raised the question, could there be a serial offender on the loose? The case was handed over to geneticists who were tasked with comparing DNA from the crime scenes. In an unexpected twist, DNA samples from both victims were identified. At first, the police thought there might be a connection between the two cases, but the analysis proved otherwise. The DNA samples were from different people. However, what was particularly intriguing was the DNA found under Karina's fingernails, on her back, and on her phone. Though small in quantity, it was enough for experts to analyze. For a long time, this DNA was the only lead the investigators had, offering hope that the perpetrator could eventually be identified. To assist with the investigation, the victim's father provided his DNA, as he was the one who discovered his daughter's body. Unfortunately, the timing was poorly chosen. It was the day of Karina's funeral. Later, all of Karina's relatives underwent DNA testing, but no matches were found. Detectives then began questioning Karina's family and friends, searching for any possible enemies or ill-wishers. However, no one had anything but positive things to say about her. She was loved and respected by everyone. As the investigation progressed, a new theory was developed. The attack could have been committed by someone motivated by base instincts. Perhaps someone encountered Karina in the secluded park and attacked her. In a bid to solve the case, the police offered a $10,000 reward for any information that might lead to the perpetrator. This call to action garnered a lot of public response. Detectives followed up on more than 250 leads, conducted over 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 1,700 reports, but all their efforts led to dead ends. It seemed the perpetrator had no previous criminal record, which made the investigation even more challenging. Then, on August 31, 2016, a utility worker came forward with information. He had been in a restricted area of the park at the time of Karina's death and saw a man emerge from the bushes and run northward. Based on his description, the New York Police Department created a sketch of the suspect. However, by December 2016, it became clear that the person in the sketch could have just been a passerby in the wrong place at the wrong time. The release of the sketch failed to provide any new leads, and the investigation stagnated once again. On December 4, 2016, the FBI took over the case. They began by developing a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, the attacker was likely familiar with the park and its surroundings, suggesting that he either lived or had lived nearby. The park's quiet, overgrown areas made it an ideal location for concealing such a crime. The police then conducted screenings of local African-American men, but this approach didn't yield any results. That's when Chanel Lewis came into the picture. His life, by all appearances, was not particularly extraordinary. He lived in a low-income housing complex in Brooklyn, about 4 to 5 miles from Spring Creek Park. Chanel, unemployed, lived with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. One detail that set him apart, however, was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Despite this, he had graduated from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. His classmates remembered him as a quiet loner who was often teased by others. He was frequently picked on and ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel wore a hoodie all the time and was often referred to as the African lizard due to his demeanor in tough situations. He would smirk and walk away when provoked. However, not everyone saw him the same way. A fellow student, 17-year-old, Danielle Munes, recalled that Chanel was actually a smart kid with good grades. She remembered that he would often show her funny videos on the bus, and she never saw him act cruelly toward others. Some reports indicated that Chanel had once mentioned bringing a knife to school. But Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of the school Chanel attended, said there were no reports of threats or disciplinary actions involving him during his time there. Despite his struggles, Chanel dreamed of working in social services to help others in distress. He was often seen wandering the streets and frequently visiting Spring Creek Park when conflicts arose at home. His minor encounters with the police were mostly for small infractions, including loitering and public urination. In May 2016, he was also reported for loitering in a local store with a crowbar. When officers responded, they checked his ID and released him since he had no prior criminal history. This incident was noted by the police and would later play a key role in the investigation. In February 2017, Detective John Russo, who had been involved in the investigation, recalled a significant detail. He had often noticed a young man in a hoodie wandering around the park. Russo had even tried to follow him once, intrigued by his odd behavior. The young man moved slowly, frequently stopping for long periods in front of houses near the park, almost as if he were scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Russo lost sight of him when he tried to contact his colleagues by phone. Investigation took a turn 2 months later, when a store owner reported seeing a teenager who matched the description. Detective Russo remembered this wanderer and thought he might have information that was worth investigating. When Russo reviewed the young man's file, certain peculiarities about him stood out. The police began looking into his background, reaching out to acquaintances and teachers. It was then that they discovered he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news raised suspicions, and without any other strong leads, officers decided to focus their attention on Chanel Lewis. It was later revealed that on the day Karina died, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. When he returned, he was disheveled with torn clothes and visible bruises. His mother asked what had happened, and Lewis claimed that he had been attacked. His story seemed to match the timeline and witness descriptions of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Lewis's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment for severe cuts and injuries, including a wounded hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day, and while his account appeared plausible, they found similarities between what had happened to Chanel and Karina Vetrano. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DNA for analysis. Detectives wondered if a perpetrator would really cooperate willingly. The interrogation began the next morning. On February 5th, Lewis admitted to being in the park at around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016. He clarified, however, that he was walking on the dirt paths, not in the thick brush, and listening to music. He confessed that he encountered a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When detectives asked him if anything had happened during the encounter, Chanel nodded and quietly said, "Yes." His vague response seemed confusing, and investigators were skeptical, fearing it would cast doubt during a trial. After some prodding, Chanel elaborated. "I was angry," he explained. "One thing led to another, and what happened, happened." He then clearly described what took place. He recalled that as he was walking in the park to distract himself from a family argument, he saw a woman jogging alone. He decided to follow her. When she passed him, he grabbed her by the shoulders, threw her to the ground, and punched her in the face several times to prevent her from screaming. He said his punches knocked out several of her teeth, and his hand was injured in the process. The struggle, according to Chanel, lasted for about 5 minutes. Karina fought back, scratching and biting, trying to resist and avoid attracting attention. Chanel dragged her off the path and into the tall grass, where he attempted to undress her and assault her. Despite her shock and resistance, Chanel continued to strangle her until he realized she had died. When detectives asked if he had known the victim before, he simply replied, "I didn't know her. It all happened by chance." The motive behind the attack was even more baffling. Chanel admitted that loud music played by a neighborhood gang member had triggered his anger and uncontrollable aggression. These pent-up emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman. Although the reason for the crime seemed strange and irrational, investigators were able to confirm Chanel's involvement when DNA comparison results came back. The microscopic traces found on Karina's body and phone matched Chanel's DNA perfectly. The police and prosecutors concluded that the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed far-fetched. It was possible that Chanel had seen Karina before, since he frequented the park. Perhaps he had admired her from a distance and decided to approach her. When she rejected him, his anger escalated, and the situation spiraled out of control. On November 5, 2018, Chanel Lewis's trial began. Despite his earlier admissions to the authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty. His family echoed his stance, denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, with a potential sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis's guilt extended beyond the courtroom, spilling into the media. Lewis's defense team raised concerns, claiming legal violations during his arrest. Alongside various news outlets, they argued racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these claims, emphasizing that the investigation had adhered to legal standards. The prosecution presented solid evidence, including DNA analysis findings. The defense, however, contended that the evidence was inadequate and potentially contaminated due to the large number of people at the crime scene, including the victim's father, who had discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Rosano stated that the odds of the DNA not belonging to Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecution also introduced Lewis's phone records, revealing internet searches on topics like second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, which raised the question, what sin was Chanel trying to atone for? The release of Lewis's confession video sparked further controversy. His lawyers argued that he had been under immense pressure and that his confession had been coerced. They suspected police of fabricating evidence, claiming the recording began only after pressure was applied to him and that the search of his home had violated protocols. The defense suggested that the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death had been initially mishandled, with public pressure for an arrest leading to Lewis becoming a scapegoat. The jury was moved by the defense's powerful arguments, and after hearing both sides, they were unable to reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial. A retrial was initially scheduled for January 22, 2019, but was postponed to March 2019. After 5 hours of deliberation, Chanel Lewis was found guilty of Karina Vetrano's death and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole on July 23, 2019. The defense attempted to delay the proceedings, further, citing an anonymous source who alleged misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and even a conspiracy, with some critics calling the trial a lynch mob. What initially seemed like a straightforward case ignited widespread prejudices and fears in society. Karina Vetrano's tragic death served as a stark reminder for women to be cautious in the world around them. Did justice prevail? In any case, a young woman's life was tragically cut short, and Chanel Lewis was sentenced to life in prison. Both families lost their children, and the hope remains that the truth was uncovered, though if not, an innocent man could be behind bars, while the true perpetrator walks free. Thanks for watching, guys. This was Jack with you. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead.